The clink of cutlery stopped as a millionaire stepped into the city's most exclusive restaurant, and froze. Across the room, the black pregnant waitress turned, tray trembling in her hands, staring at the man who had thrown her out of his life 3 years ago. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. The murmur of polite conversation died down for a moment as diners sensed something shift in the air. The tall man in a tailored navy suit stood near the entrance, one hand still in his pocket, his other resting casually on the arm of the platinum blonde woman beside him. But his eyes weren't on the maitre d' or the grand chandelier above, they were locked on her. Bianca tightened her grip on the tray until her knuckles whitened. The champagne flute at the edge rattled against the silver as she tried to steady her breathing. 7 months pregnant, wearing the snug black and white uniform that strained against her belly, she felt every curious glance in the room. Yet none burned more than his. Adrian Blake, the man who had once sworn she was his queen, now stood in the doorway, looking as if he'd seen a ghost. His date leaned closer, whispering something with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Bianca forced herself to move, taking slow steps toward table 6, pretending not to notice that her former husband was at table 9, only a few feet away. She'd thought about this moment 100 times, but the reality was heavier. 3 years since the day he'd handed her a suitcase and $1,000, telling her she didn't fit the image he needed to keep his business growing. 3 years since she'd stopped being a wife and became a problem to erase. Waitress, his voice finally cut through the clatter of silverware, low but edged. We've been waiting. He still hadn't looked away from her belly. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, but her voice came out steady. Good evening. Can I take your order? The blonde beside him raised a perfectly arched brow. Do you two know each other? For the briefest second, Bianca saw the war on his face, shock turning to discomfort, then hardening into the cold mask she knew too well. An old acquaintance, he muttered. Old acquaintance. 5 years of marriage, reduced to 2 words. She held his gaze a moment longer, then shifted to the blonde. Would you like to start with a drink? Bianca wasn't here to cry or plead. She was here for something far more important. And tonight was only the beginning. The question from the blonde still lingered in the air, do you two know each other? But Bianca didn't flinch. She had spent years preparing for moments like this, learning how to keep her composure while the past tried to drag her under. Adrian's eyes flickered briefly with irritation. He hated when someone pressed him in public. The same irritation she had seen in the weeks before everything fell apart. Back then, the cracks had started small. They were still living in the penthouse, still attending charity galas and business dinners together. But little by little, she noticed him introducing her less and less. When he did, it was with a tone that seemed almost apologetic, as though her presence needed explaining. The night it all broke, he came home late, the scent of expensive cologne and someone else's perfume clinging to his suit. He didn't sit down. He didn't ask about her day. He just stood in the center of the living room, his hands in his pockets, as if delivering a business report. Bianca, we need to talk, he'd said, avoiding her eyes. Her stomach had tightened instantly. About what? My company is expanding. We're securing partnerships with some very influential people. And, well, they notice things. Notice what? She pressed, though a part of her already knew. That you're different. You don't come from the same circles. You didn't grow up in their world. She had laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. Different? Adrian, I have a degree. I've supported you through every deal, every late night. It's not about degrees. It's about image. Some clients are uncomfortable. There it was, laid bare, uncomfortable with a black wife. The conversation spiraled. His excuses turned into accusations. She was holding him back, she didn't fit into the future he envisioned. And within days, he had arranged everything, a lawyer, divorce papers, and a cold envelope with a check that wouldn't even cover a year's rent. The last image she had of that home was him standing in the doorway as she walked out, suitcase in hand. He didn't touch her. Didn't look her in the eye. Just let the elevator doors close between them. Now, standing a few feet from him in this glittering restaurant, Bianca wondered if he remembered that night as clearly as she did. She doubted it. Men like Adrian never remembered the details of the pain they caused. But she did. And tonight, she intended to make sure he never forgot. The restaurant's soft jazz played on, but Bianca barely heard it over the pounding in her ears. She set the tray down at the service station, exhaling slowly. Her fingers still tingled from gripping it too hard. From the corner of her eye, she could see Adrian's table. The blonde leaned in close to him, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "She's pregnant. And she's working here." The smirk that followed made Bianca's skin prickle. Bianca straightened her posture and walked toward another table, taking an order for sparkling water and oysters as if nothing in the world could rattle her. That was the key, never give them the satisfaction of seeing the crack. As she moved through the dining room, she caught Adrian's gaze again. His eyes darted between her belly and her face, his mind clearly racing. She could almost hear the questions in his head. How far along is she? Who's the father? 7 months. That detail would gnaw at him. He'd do the math, realize she'd moved on quickly after him, and that the child wasn't his. That thought alone seemed to soften his jaw for a moment before the mask returned. When she passed their table again, he leaned slightly toward her. "Bianca, we need to talk." 5 minutes. She didn't even slow her pace. "We have nothing to talk about, Adrian. You made that clear 3 years ago." The blonde arched a brow, enjoying the tension like it was her evening entertainment. 3 years ago. "Adrian, you didn't tell me you were married before." He shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his cufflinks, a tell she remembered from every awkward business meeting he'd dragged her to. It wasn't important. Bianca kept moving, delivering a tray to a family in the corner. Her steps were steady, her expression neutral, but inside, her thoughts burned. This wasn't just chance. This wasn't bad luck. She had chosen this job, this restaurant, this exact shift, because she knew he would be here. For months, she'd learned his habits, the nights he came, the table he preferred, the overpriced wine he always ordered. Every humiliating shift, every sarcastic comment from customers, every ache in her back from carrying both her baby and the weight of survival, all of it had been leading here. She glanced toward the kitchen doorway, where a small black notebook lay tucked in her bag. Inside, names, dates, screenshots, and details Adrian would never want the world to see. And soon, the world would see all of it. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments, I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. Later that night, after the dinner rush had slowed, Bianca stood at the back counter refilling a coffee pot. The warm, bitter scent filled the air, but her mind was far from the restaurant. Through the reflection in the steel panel, she could still see Adrian's table. He was laughing now, but it was forced, the kind of laugh she'd heard him use when he was covering discomfort in front of investors. She'd studied that laugh, just like she'd studied everything else about him. 6 months ago, when she first realized he was still in the city, she started gathering information. Not just gossip, evidence. Every Tuesday and Friday night, Adrian came here. Same time. Same table. Same performative routine of holding a woman's hand, ordering a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and flashing that $1 million smile. The pattern was predictable. That made it exploitable. Bianca's real breakthrough came when she reconnected with Rafael Morales, the father of her unborn child. They had met at a legal aid clinic, where he volunteered his time for people fighting workplace discrimination. When she told him what Adrian had done, his jaw tightened in a way that told her he understood the ugliness behind the words, "not a good fit." Over late-night cups of tea in Raphael's small apartment, they began building a case. Not a legal one, a public one. Bianca had no interest in suing for money. She wanted something Adrian valued far more, his image. Every move was deliberate. The change of name on her work ID, using her middle name instead of Bianca. The transfer to Bella Vista, knowing it was one of his favorite places. Even the shifts she requested, aligning perfectly with his habits. And the notebook. That little black book had become her silent weapon. Inside were printouts of his social media photos with a parade of interchangeable dates, screenshots of text messages from his former secretary, and, most damning of all, emails between Adrian and a major client. In those emails, Adrian admitted that his black wife didn't align with the traditional image the client preferred. Raphael's eyes had lit up when she handed him the copies. "This is more than enough," he'd said. "You could end him with this." She didn't need to respond. He already knew she would. The opportunity would come in just 1 week. Adrian's company was closing its biggest deal ever, $28 million. The celebration? A grand event at the Continental Hotel, with every important client and investor in attendance. And Bianca already had a uniform for that night. The ballroom of the Continental Hotel glittered under crystal chandeliers. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved like clockwork between tables, silver trays balanced effortlessly in their hands. The air buzzed with the chatter of high-profile guests, glasses clinking over congratulations. At the center of it all stood Adrian Blake, dressed in a charcoal suit that likely cost more than most people's yearly rent. His arm was wrapped around the same blonde from the restaurant, her sequin gown catching the light with every movement. They looked like a power couple pulled straight from a magazine cover. And that was exactly the image Adrian wanted to project tonight, the successful, unattached businessman who had it all. Bianca moved quietly among the staff, her black catering uniform concealing her 8-month belly beneath a tailored jacket. No one looked twice at her. She was invisible here, just another server moving through the crowd. Perfect. The envelopes were tucked neatly into the folds of her serving tray, slipped between champagne flutes like they belonged there. As she made her rounds, she placed one discreetly at each table, sliding them beside wine glasses and dessert menus. The guests didn't open them right away. But they would. Across the room, she caught Adrian's eye. His smile faltered. Confusion flickered, then something darker. He hadn't expected to see her again, certainly not here, in front of the very people whose approval kept his empire standing. She kept moving, her steps unhurried, her expression calm. At a corner table, one of the investors opened his envelope. The soft rustle of paper was soon followed by a sharp intake of breath. Inside each packet was the same damning collection, a photo of Adrian and Bianca on their wedding day, copies of text messages instructing his secretary to keep his black wife away from client events, and an email where he explicitly stated that interracial marriage projects the wrong image for certain deals. One by one, more guests began opening their envelopes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, sharp and rising. Someone at the head table dropped their fork with a clang. Adrian's mask cracked. He stepped away from his date, pushing through the tables toward Bianca. "What are you doing?" he hissed, voice low but shaking. She didn't answer. Instead, she offered champagne to a nearby guest who was staring at Adrian like he'd just sprouted horns. Then the first investor spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is this true?" Every head turned toward Adrian. Cameras from journalists stationed at the back began to click. His carefully constructed life was beginning to unravel, and the night had only just begun. Adrian's jaw tightened as more envelopes were opened around the room. The polite hum of conversation had shifted into a low, restless buzz. Investors leaned toward each other, whispering. Some glanced at Adrian with visible disgust, others simply placed their glasses down and stood to leave. The blonde at his side, the same one who had mocked Bianca at the restaurant, pulled her hand from his arm. "You told me you were never married," she said sharply, her voice carrying over the crowd. Adrian reached for her, but she stepped back. "You lied to me. You lied to all of them." Bianca finally turned to face him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The microphone at the side of the stage was still live from the speeches earlier. "You told me I didn't fit into your world," she said, each word steady, deliberate. "So I created my own." Every eye in the room was on her now. Even the servers had stopped moving. "You traded your marriage for $28 million, she continued, her gaze fixed on him. "You chose an image over a life we built together. And you thought you'd buried that truth." Adrian's face flushed. "Bianca, this isn't the place, this is exactly the place," she cut in. "Because these are the people you were so desperate to impress. They should know who you really are." Gasps rippled through the guests. A man in a navy suit, one of Adrian's most important investors, stepped forward, holding up the papers from his envelope. "I don't work with liars, Blake. Especially ones who hide their own history out of prejudice." He tore the contract in half and dropped it on the table. Others followed. The sound of tearing paper and closing briefcases filled the ballroom. Adrian's blonde date shook her head and turned away, disappearing into the crowd without another word. Bianca stepped down from the stage, Raphael appearing at her side to take the tray from her hands. Adrian moved toward her, desperation replacing anger. "Please, we can talk about this," she walked past him without slowing. "We already did. 3 years ago. You just weren't listening." And as she crossed the ballroom, guests parting to let her through, it was clear to everyone in that glittering hall who had truly won. 6 months later, the sound of laughter drifted through a modest but sunlit office on the edge of downtown. The sign on the glass door read, "Santos and Morales, Legal Advocacy for Workplace Justice." Inside, Bianca sat behind a polished wooden desk, gently rocking a bassinet with her foot while scanning a stack of contracts. Her daughter, tiny hands curled into fists, warm breaths soft against the blanket, slept peacefully beside her. Raphael stepped in from the hallway, a file in one hand, 2 coffees in the other. 3 more discrimination cases this week, he said with a smile. Word's getting out, people know they have somewhere to turn now. Bianca took the coffee, the corner of her mouth lifting. Good. The more people who speak up, the less room there is for people like Adrian to hide. His name was hardly spoken anymore. After that night at the Continental, the fallout had been swift and brutal. Every major investor pulled out within days. The story, complete with photos of the envelopes, quotes from the contracts, and Bianca's calm dismantling of his image, had gone viral. Adrian's penthouse was sold within months. The luxury car went next. When the news finally reached Bianca, he was working at a used car dealership in a neighboring city, his name a cautionary whisper among the circles he once dominated. "I heard Sophia's already found another millionaire," Raphael added dryly, setting down the file. Bianca didn't look up from signing a contract. Some patterns never change. She reached down to adjust the blanket over her daughter, who stirred slightly but didn't wake. Leaning close, Bianca whispered, "You'll grow up in a world where no one will make you choose between love and success." It wasn't just a hope, it was a promise. For Bianca, the victory had never been about ruining Adrian's finances. It was about dismantling the false power that had allowed him to treat her as disposable. By exposing him publicly, she had turned her own humiliation into a weapon, one that inspired others to fight back. Outside, the winter sun caught on the gold letters of the office sign. It shone like a quiet reminder, strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it moves silently, patiently, until the moment comes to strike. And when it does, the world remembers who truly held the power all along. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.